Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're listening to, tuned in to, watching and viewing us here at Newcastle Fast FM, broadcasting across the internet, across the world, across the edges of the galaxy. I hope all is well with you, mashallah, and all the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this blessed mercy month of Ramadan is upon you and your loved ones. I hope you're well, I hope you're secure, and the cloudy out there, but wherever you are, I hope the sun is shining on you and the nur of Islam, the nur of your deen is glowing inside of you, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Wajid and I'm your host and host and co-host for Brother Abdul-Haqq, who will be joining us in just a moment. Before we begin, Bismillah wa kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala nabi al-Mustafa wa ali wa sahbihi wa man ihtada bihadihi amma ba'd. Our brother Dr. Abdul-Haqq Baker will be joining us in just a moment. Before he does so, inshallah, I just want to review a little bit about what we've been discussing. Now, Dr. Abdul-Haqq works a lot with people who are on the fringe element of maybe going a little bit on the wrong side of the track. He works with people who are on the wrong side of the track and gets them back on track. And he works not just with those people directly, but he works with governments, many official people in doing this stuff. And in fact, he has a PhD in this stuff, so he does kind of know what he's talking about. The last couple of weeks have been really insightful. In the first week, we got a good insight about understanding of what it is when people sort of come into a faith or a system of belief, because ultimately, the way the human brain is wired is the same across regardless of what your belief systems are. Yes, last week we looked at the stage of youthfulness, and the youthfulness where we tend to, once we adopt a faith or a belief system, we become a little overzealous. We become very sort of black and white in how we do things. Things are right, things are wrong, and there is no sort of grey matter in between. And so therefore that perception of things, it can have a challenge on relationships because there are strong edges that are there that are stopping things from smoothing over, from communication and where relationships can develop and do things. We move into kind of an idealistic perspective where we have something cognitive, but a cognition of it, the understanding of it, is an abstract idea. And that abstract idea does not necessarily move into an area of association or application, depending on how you're doing it. I'm actually going off another brother there, but we discussed that. That was with the brother Umar. We were talking about that process of understanding of what an abstract idea is and actually putting it into a way where you're actually moving about, and then you're applying it into daily life. And I suppose similarly here, mashallah, as brother Dr. Abdul-Haqq has been very eloquently elucidating and giving us an understanding that we can move into this idealistic kind of mentality, or a purist, overzealous kind of almost evangelical perspective on things, on life, and how things should be and how things are, and just moving into that we become absorbed, we start to adopt things, and we're not quite clear on how to identify ourselves. We're still exploring ourselves in the sense of identity and who we are, but also what we are looking at is we're looking at a time in a stage where we're very sort of mature, and it allows somebody to re-identify themselves. And I think that's a very powerful moment that happens at that point. And it's a critical moment as well, because at that point, when you are choosing to create a new identity for yourself, who informs you will inevitably decide where you are going with things. And this rather delicate and tripping over words here, but this delicate stage and rather vulnerable stage, that's the word I was looking for, this vulnerable stage that you're at is going to be not just fundamental in which direction you're going, but it's going to make you very much decide which path and which track you're going to go down. All right. So that's kind of the general overview that we discussed with Dr. Abdul-Haqq. Subhanallah, for those of you who have had the pleasure of hearing him and discussing things, inshallah. Today we're going to look at the next stage of that, and we're going to move into that in just a moment. A couple of things that we did also cover was around the idea of awareness. And all of what Dr. Abdul-Haqq has been referring to us and talking to us about is around self-awareness. You become conscious and aware of yourself and your belief system. So if you're kind of reviving your faith, you're coming into faith, whatever it is, you will go through these sort of four phases. So the first thing is you accept the faith. Second one is going into this youthfulness phase. And third one we'll be talking about is this adult stage, where there's a sense of maturity that is starting to kick in, inshallah. And because of the way things are, we will be, the way things are, there will be always space for understanding and for this growth. And when you move from this idealistic kind of view into a real life view, and that comes to empirical evidence, right? Empirical evidence is that which you learn, it steps you up, you understand, you kind of move on to the next stage, next phase of things. And that's the bit which we'll be discussing in just a moment. As I mentioned before, Dr. Abdul-Haqq, mashallah, is a very well qualified brother, mashallah. And he's joining us from Saudi Arabia, where he's currently living and working from. And but his own backstory of coming from London, of having options himself, in the sense of his understanding of what he decided the dunya wasn't quite fulfilling for him, of having two very clear directions he could have taken, but then choosing to forego that for the sake of this deen, for accepting this deen, and then really redefining himself once having accepted that knowledge, taken on that knowledge, and then exploring his own identity as a Muslim, and moving into this wonderful way of work that he does, inshallah, to help, to support, and to overcome the challenges and difficulties of misguided belief. Because as Muslims, we sincerely believe that this violent and aggressive following of things and not having any sort of guidance or coming together on things, that it is indeed a misguided way of accepting this deen and of following it. And it comes from that overzealousness, and it comes from that idealistic view on making things too black and white, and not really, excuse me, and not really being conscious and aware of consequences, not really understanding the weight and the impact and the effect of things being done. And so it leads on to that, hopefully, inshallah, that there will be some evolution, I suppose, in the sense of evolving and growing into the next natural phase of what you do. I suppose it's similar to going from a caterpillar into a cocoon, into a butterfly kind of thing. And so I'll double check that metaphor with Dr. Abdul-Haqq, make sure it's definitely, it aligns itself with the work that he is putting out there. At this moment in time, inshallah, they are just opening the fast in the Middle East regions. So Brother Abdul-Haqq is doing that, and then he will be joining us very, very shortly. And so exploring that idea of youthfulness, that we do get information, and that we are not quite fully able to, that we aren't quite that even though we have the information, we aren't quite able to use it or understand it to that it's as effective as it needs to be. And so it's fundamental really to how we go about what we do really. But this doesn't just affect us as far as our faith is concerned. This actually is something that goes through a lot of our usual life cycle now of things. If you consider anything that you learn, if you consider anything that you try to understand, the basics, so for example, of understanding the alphabet and then being able to understand taking these shapes, these abstract ideas, and creating something that is quite very clearly going to be of some use and of some purpose. So we're moving from that youthfulness stage of being overzealous and being idealistic, and sort of moving into the next phase of adulthood, or almost like a cocoon. Anyway, that's enough from me. Inshallah, Brother Dr. Abdul-Haqq is online now, inshallah. I'm just going to add him to the stream, inshallah. You bear with me just one moment. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Can you hear me okay? Oh,
I can, yes. Alhamdulillah. Can you hear me?
just one moment. Let me just check.
Can you hear me?
Yes, assalamu alaikum. I can hear you now. Fantastic. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
How have you been? You okay?
Fine, alhamdulillah. We're in the last 10 nights now, so 20th, so subhanallah. It was only the other day we were speaking at the beginning.
Subhanallah, it really has just flown, subhanallah. It's been, it's subhanallah. We'll discuss it, inshallah, maybe a bit later when we have time towards the end of the show, possibly. But yeah, heading towards the last 10 days, and this is the penultimate show we're having together, inshallah, as we're going to be heading into the last few days of Ramadan. I just wanted to just get straight into it, inshallah. I've just been touching on the idea of our second phase of youthfulness and the idea of what we've been doing for ourselves in putting ourselves into moving from that black and white area into an adulthood kind of stage. And I was talking about sort of like an evolution almost of things.
The sound is a bit muffled at the moment, and I'm not sure because you are using it this time. The last time you weren't, so I'm not sure if it's that.
Yeah, let me try the other mic. Right, is that any better? Any better?
No, still a bit muffled, not like before.
Okay, how is that?
Much better. Much better.
Much better? Okay, alhamdulillah. Let's go with that, and hopefully, inshallah, that should be it. Jazakallah khair for your patience. So I've probably been muffling on for the last 10 minutes as well. But what I'll say is so we were just touching on the youthfulness stage and moving into adult stage.
Yes.
Yeah, moving from that sort of abstract idea into a deeper and better understanding of actually there's more to it than just the black and white understanding of things.
Exactly. And I think that touching upon the last 10 days, I wanted to discuss the adult phase. And as you know, that's a period of when the reflection and review starts on the earlier two phases we spoke about. And I hope we can look at it. We've been looking at a macro level in that we're looking at ourselves vis-a-vis wider society, how we're going to engage, what we need to do with participation, and how we're going to implement our deen. However, on a microcosmic level, I'm thinking it would be interesting now to look at those stages in Ramadan. So, for example, the founding stage, let's apply that to the first week of Ramadan, because we all faced unprecedented challenges in that none of us, I think most of us alive today, have not faced a Ramadan. in the circumstances that we face today. And so when we entered this Ramadan, no matter how many Ramadans we've done, it was a new experience for us.
Yeah.
So there was some certain that we needed to make about, okay, what does this look like? What will this look like? How is it making me feel? So everyone was met with the shock of the empty haram, the haramain.
Yeah. That
was a cognitive shock for all of us. Sadness and upset that we're not seeing Taraweeh, or we wouldn't be seeing Taraweeh in the whole blessed month in the haramain filled as usual. But also there's another cognition, a cognitive awakening at that founding stage, the beginning of Ramadan, that we should look at. A lesson came for the whole world in that they saw that the Kaaba was empty. And this was evidence and symbolic that the entire Muslim world does not worship that object, that we worship Allah.
SubhanAllah.
And non-Muslims saw that now. For the first time in their lives, in living memory for them, they saw the Muslims did not worship that object. Such were the accusations that proceeded. So this is the first cognition, the founding stage that we had in the first week of Ramadan. Moving to the next stage, which was the youthful stage. Okay, now we're in the second week. It's happening. We're in Ramadan. Are we doing Taraweeh in the second week? Are we doing more Adhkar remembrance? What are we doing different? We've got a zeal that we're going to be doing virtual iftars. We're going to be doing virtual Taraweehs, maybe meeting our family online. That's the idealistic, exuberant stage that we started embracing in the second week of Ramadan. Now we're in the third week. There's a time for reflection, review, and to comprehend what we're doing and to step that up in these last 10 nights. So you can see where we've discussed the previous weeks, the macro stage, and I'm saying, right, let's look on this on a microcosmic stage level in view of Ramadan and where we are, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah. No, mashallah. And it's so profound in that way, because like you said, I mean, we've all done it in so many, just using that same model, how it's affected different elements of our lives, whether it's our kids being at home, right? And we started off like, oh, they're going to be home, they're not going to school. Okay, how are we going to deal with this? And then you kind of get into that first stage of, okay, we're going to do everything. This is all happening. And it's like, actually, you can't do everything. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. This isn't going to coordinate well. And then you kind of move into this, okay, right, okay, we kind of need a bit of a reset review. Because at the moment, as you might have seen, the UK, they're saying that possibly in June, they'll start with the primary school kids going back to school. So there's kind of this you can kind of see a timeline now where things are possibly going to start happening. But then that obviously means the secondary kids schools aren't going to go. So there's a whole load of stuff still up in the air about it. But again, it's that point of coming to how do you then, because I think we talked about humility, and we talked about being self-aware and focused enough to have that ability to contemplate on things. And now that you that we are sort of, like you said, at the last 10 days now, what is it that we need to be aware of, or how do we awaken ourselves to look back on kind of the last 20 days and sort of say, okay, this is the good and the bad of it, not be too aggressive in the sense of beating ourselves up too much about it, but actually sort of say, okay, what have we learned, and how do you then use that? How do you move on from that, rather than going into the last 10 days and sort of saying, okay, you know what, it's the last 10 days, this is it, got my blinkers on, everything's out the park, and I'm going for it?
Good question. While we look to step up, I think, everything about the spiritual aspects and the practical aspects, we've also got to look at what we can take over beyond Ramadan. And what you'll find is that many will have that zeal from the youthful phase, bring it into the adult phase, especially in Ramadan, the last 10 nights, and we will say we're going to go out with a bang. We don't need to go out with a bang. What we need to do is get to a level of sustainability that we can carry out beyond this particular month. And what is important at this point in time now is that while we are reviewing ourselves and reviewing our environment, some things are going to continue. The lockdown is going to continue. We're not out of the woods yet with the coronavirus. So psychologically, spiritually, Ramadan would have gone. But the prevalent circumstances that we face preceding and subsequent to Ramadan are going to still be there. So if our mindset can be to maintain a particular level of spirituality, while at the same time, the practical steps that we've become accustomed to implementing in our daily lives, even right down to relationships with our parents who are not living in the same home, family, siblings, Zoom calls or whatever we're doing, to maintain that. And to maintain that with the cognitive understanding of how that relates to our faith, how that relates to us civically, how that relates to reward with Allah spiritually. These three levels.
And then I think that really sort of brings to the fore what we discussed last time as well, because last time we discussed that, you know, at the youthfulness, you're kind of exploring your identity. You don't necessarily know who you are, but you kind of have this opportunity to become something a bit different. But when you get to this stage, you're exploring your core values, really, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely. And what are those core values? So who am I as a Muslim, first and foremost? Who am I as a human being? Some of us have dualities of identities, culturally and otherwise. Who are we? What does that mean? How does that make me as an individual? And how do I project or convey myself as an individual? What you've just said there is very important, because what we find today is that we are so externally raised that we look at what others like and try to fill those pigeonholes or become that, so that we become popular. And that's a very superficial way of being. And sadly, with social media today, with mental health, and with our children and ourselves wanting to belong, we do none of the things introspection and looking at our core values. We look at what everyone else is doing, what everybody else wants us to be, and what they say society should be. And we become that. Hence the levels of depression, hence the levels of suicide, hence the levels of mental health. Not all of it's attributable to that, but these aspects do contribute to a greater or lesser extent.
Yeah, I think just if you can just explore that a little bit, because I think this is really fundamental in going from that youthfulness stage to the adult stage, is this understanding that, you know, things do implode because it's what is being done is very delicate. It's, you know, it's some things are being tolerated, some things are being followed because it just seems to be the right track to do. But if it's not coming from a place of core value, when that gets shaken, and those things fall by the wayside because they haven't really come from a place of the true self, you know, of really understanding what do I mean by my core value? Because if that is my core value, then no matter what that change is, I will hold on to it in a way where it's not going to waver, irrespective of what is happening. It will always remain true to that core value. So even if it shifts, like from delivering something face to face to delivering something online, the core value of mine is still me. Just the situation around me is asking a different question of me of how to deliver that core value of myself.
Right, the distortions come back with you again. So I'm going to try and go from what I understood that you were saying. It's quite distorted.
Okay.
So move that transition from the youthful phase to the adult phase. What it needs to be considered is that at those first two stages, the learning is abstract. It's not an actual process of implementation, except from a perspective of idealism. So the individual moving across to that more reflective stage, it can be challenging because they're going to be realizing that some of what I've known and the way I've acted upon some of what I've known has been counterproductive. let's say, for example, a husband and wife, they may then be realizing that they were at different ends of this particular model. In the husband, for example, could have been very idealistic of what Islam looked like and tried to implement it as it was implemented during the time of the Prophet and the Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Sahaba. However, he realizes that that age is not the same age that we're living in now. The restrictions that he's placed upon himself and his family, for example, his wife may be saying, this is not practicable. This is not feasible to live in the way that you're saying to live. The etiquettes, the cultural aspects, the religious aspects, but some of the practicalities of living, we are in the West, we are in a different era. And so they may be at different stages of that model. They may be at particular stages of that model, and that's where conflict comes about. Realization now will start taking place at the adult stage that mistakes were made in my relationship with my spouse, in relationship with my children, my parents, and the like. And that's when the contextualization starts taking place. That's when it starts taking place due to experience. And that's important for the individual who's moving between those two stages to understand that about themselves and be patient with that.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and so what then is that process then, that reflection process? How does that work then? Because like you said, we've got 10 days of Ramadan coming up. The 10 days are happening. And we want to kind of lift ourselves up so we're on a high, so we can keep going rather than we high and we come down. And so where's the thinking process? Each of us is completely unique and individual in that way. So how do we then take this time now, inshallah, over the next few nights to not really wear ourselves out, but to explore ourselves? That awareness starts to happen where we can understand what our core values are. So like you said, when Ramadan has moved on, we're not waiting another 11 months for that experience again. You know, we're 1st of Shawwal, we're enjoying Eid, but our mindset is correct, inshallah.
Good question. You mentioned about this last 10 nights rising to a particular plateau, to a particular level. And we do that. But that starts from a platform. And the platform that we've reached in Ramadan, the normality of the 5 daily prayers, the sunnah prayers before and after those 5 daily prayers, set ourselves a goal that should be for us beyond Ramadan. We may not be able to do Qiyam al-Layl every night and Tarawih. Maybe we can designate one night in the week after Ramadan for those of us who don't do it at all, and say, okay, when can I get up late at night? It's the weekend. I don't have work tomorrow. I don't have school. So maybe a Friday night or a Saturday night, for example. Not to overload ourselves in these last 10 nights, hit a plateau like a lot of individuals do, and then beyond Eid, that person becomes unrecognizable and becomes depressed in themselves because they've realized that high of that month has gone. The high of the month has gone, but the spirituality that you achieved and I achieved is still with us. And it's up to us now to keep that minimal requirement, that minimal level that we achieved in Ramadan, not beyond Ramadan, the minimal level that we achieved in Ramadan as our norm. Once we do that and we move out of Ramadan, we won't feel that despondency when we see, well, okay, I'm still doing my sunnahs. I'm still attentive to my prayers. I may take up the Monday to Thursday fasts. I may try and do the 3 fasts in the middle of the month. I may try, even if it's once a month, I will stand up for Qiyam al-Layl. Then we can look back pre-Ramadan and know, yes, I hit a plateau, but I stayed at a core level of practice, which I'm continuing beyond Ramadan. And remember when we started off with these podcasts, with these interviews and discussions, we said that before Ramadan entered, we should have seized the opportunity already because we were on lockdown. There wasn't anything we could do. What was the excuse for not stepping up to do more, to have introspection, to reflect, to appreciate the values of our families? Because we saw this disproportionate number of ethnic minorities dying, and we saw the first doctors to have died were Muslim. And then we started looking at our parents. They are vulnerable. Those of us with underlying conditions, they are vulnerable. This is taking everyone. So we started looking at each other and our families different, and we should continue that. Not just because of the coronavirus. Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. Every soul will taste death. We should be looking at each other and really cherishing this particular time more so because of the time that we have with each other and the times that we are away from other loved ones that we can't visit. How many of us know, or it may happen to many listeners here, where you could only visit your elderly parents and stand outside because of quarantine? I've got colleagues who were crying, their parents were crying inside, looking at their parents. I can't come in, I may infect you, I don't know. How many of us have gone through that? How many of us have had messages from family inside? We've seen the pictures, South London, for example, of the mass graves, janazas that were taking place. So during this month now, we've got to look at relations. We've got to look at how important we are to others that love us and how important they are to us, those who we love. This, in these last 10 nights, together with that equilibria of practice, worship, should be what we carry through beyond Ramadan, inshallah.
Ramadan, inshallah. Okay, inshallah. I'm just going to pick out two key points that I think are very pertinent from what you've just said. The first one is that the continuation of actions, of deeds. Yeah. And secondly, gratitude. Really being grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for so much more, and really sort of opening our vision and seeing, actually, alhamdulillah, we are so blessed with so much. And like you said, so many things have been taken away, and they are peripheral to what we are, because it's exposing us, as we talked about, that core belief system that you have inside. What is it, and what are you left with now? And I suppose if somebody's coming from that youthfulness stage now, they're still quite vulnerable again, because they're asking those questions rather than putting out and changing their environment and their external situation. They're becoming more inward, and that inward questioning is going to bring up a whole load of challenges and emotions. Like you said, people have walked different stages of life. People have sadly experienced certain things in life that, others have been protected from. But all of this is now going to start to bubble up, and it's going to rise in some way. But it is very introspective in that. And so is it just a matter of, well, why don't I just keep doing what I'm capable of doing and see where it goes? Or do I need to be more specific on understanding what my core values are and what my personal vision is?
I think a bit of both, but there's a key ingredient that ties both of those together.
Okay.
When you are doing this and going through this particular process, it's important that you divulge that and you give that to Allah privately, totally. What do I mean by that? Because as we're having that period of introspection, we're going to see and feel things about ourselves that we don't like. We're going to feel senses of loss, senses of failure, senses. And many of us can have a need of either giving up or taking it out on someone. to do at that particular moment in time is take that to Allah in quiet moments and say, this is me. This is me. Help me to become better than what I am, and to move to a place better than where I am, because no one else can help me with that. I said the dua last week that we spoke about, Hasbi Allah wa la ilaha Hasbi Allah la ilaha illahu alayhi tawakkaltu wa huwa rabbil arshil azim. I put my trust in Allah. We say words. What do we mean when we? And we can only look at some of the examples in the Quran. And when I was reading Surah Maryam recently, and I spoke to my children about it, and it may seem simplistic, but I was surprised. And I spoke about Ibrahim alayhi salam. When Maryam had the baby, and we saw the response of the people, the wider family, like, this is a great thing you've done. Because the environment, the community at that time was very moral and chaste and everything. Imagine this woman had not been touched by any. She walks back into her community with a baby. For then their mind, fornication has taken place. This is a great thing. She comes from a noble. Just doing that alone, think about the mindset to do that. And then what happens? Isa speaks to the people. And I said to my family, today, if a woman came in with a child into her community, everyone would be, oh, coochie, who's the baby? What? No questions asked. Where's the man? Nothing. Because that's just the difference in the society now. There's no inward reflection on our actions, on our core values, on who we are. Society accepts us as we are, which is fine. That's the society that we live in. But we have to accept ourselves using a criteria and a benchmark that surpasses everything societally, no matter which country or society we come from. And that's Islam. And that's Islam. And if we are not taking these issues of ourselves to Allah and we're looking elsewhere, that doesn't mean we do not go to counselors. That does not mean we don't take advice and counseling from our parents or anyone like that. Ultimately, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in.
Yeah.
That is the ultimate that we need to focus on when we are doing this introspection. Taking it to Allah to get us to the next stage. I talk about Ibrahim as well. Let's envisage this. When his people cast him out and said, burn him. I want us to visualize that. And we hear from the tafsir the extent of that fire.
Yeah.
And he walked into it. He walked into it because of his tawakkul ala Allah, his trust in Allah. No, we're not prophets, but we have these examples of the prophets. We have them calling upon Allah. How do we call upon Allah if we've got these as examples? And once we do that, as we know in the Hadith Qudsi, take a step towards Allah, or we walk towards Allah, he comes running. In the sense as the Hadith Qudsi speaks about. So in that instance there, it has to be taken back to Allah when we're moving through these transitional stages. In every stage, we have to take it back to Allah and mean it, not just a verbal statement, not just a tertiary action for the moment. We've really got to go back to him.
Okay, so I'm just going to unpick that a little bit with you, because you're right, especially with Maryam alayhi salam, that Allah gave her one of the greatest miracles, subhanallah, that gets mentioned in the Quran, of Isa alayhi salam, and the nobility of that. And you've mentioned about Ibrahim alayhi salam, how he was brought into this situation. Now, coming from a black and white scenario into this adult phase, you in a infant or that youthful stage, everything's black and white. So you say to yourself, well, I can't complain because complaining would make me ungrateful, right? But I know when I read Yaqub alayhi salam's story that they were crying and the people said, why do you grieve and complain so much? And he said, I don't complain to you, I complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Now, that's an English translation, that's not the Arabic, so I don't know quite how that word or what that does that mean. So, like you said, you know, as an adult, you have your grievances, you have difficulties that your challenges going through, whether that's internally, your you know, your near and beloved, or whether that's work, or whether that's whatever it is. There's that stuff happening all the time. Where does that happen, and how does that complaining happen in a way where it nourishes you, do you understand, rather than it sends you off on a spiral?
Excellent question. And I think when we look at Ayub and the complaint as it is in the English language, what was that coupled with? That was coupled with the acknowledgement, the acceptance, the dependency of Allah as the one who gives mercy and the one who's the provider. He didn't just say, oh Allah, look at me, what's happening? He gave acknowledgement to Allah's Tawheed. He gave acknowledgement to Allah as the one who removes the sin. When we look at the Anbiya, the rest of the prophets, and they call upon Allah, when you had, was it Jonah, and La ilaha illa ant, subhanaka inni kunna min al-zalimin. He called upon the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he said, I've done wrong. Okay, Musa alayhi salam, Rabbi inni zalamtu nafsi, faghfirli. I've done wrong to myself, so you forgive me. Adam alayhi salam, when he committed the sin, Noah, when he he asked about his son. All of that was coupled with a dependency upon Allah, an acknowledgement of Allah's Tawheed in that instance. When we have got a grievance, when we have got a problem, and we take it to Allah, and because you are Ar-Rahman, because you are Ar-Rahim, because you are Al-Wadud, because you are Al-Kareem, this is what his attributes are there. Call up, he has the best names, therefore call upon him with names. So we have got that grievance. Some of us are suffering financially, even more so with what's happening. We should be calling Ya Hayyul Ya Al-Qayyum, or Ya Al-Kareem, Ya Al-Razak. When we are feeling unloved or we've got problems in the family, Allah is Al-Wadud, Ya Al-Wadud. Yeah. When we have got these grievances, we have to take it to Allah, calling upon him, in his names, attributes. Remember, we spoke about the depth and breadth of attributes subhanahu wa ta'ala, and actually comprehending them. These prophets, the stories of the prophets, the Anbiya, comprehended Allah's asma wa sifat, his names and attributes. We need to comprehend them, or attempt to comprehend them, knowing that when we are in whatever situation that we're in, we can call upon him, we can depend upon him. Itawakkaltu.
So then this, you see, the subhanallah, jazakallah khair for highlighting that, because it's this, the acknowledgement is that the knowledge is not just an abstract idea. So it's not saying, Allah, you are Al-Quddus, you are the most holy, you are Al-Fattah, the one who gives, victory and things, and yet look at my situation. So it's kind of, it's bringing those two things together. Like you said, if you're suffering, struggling, you're Ar-Razzaq, you are, Al-Malik al-Mulk, you are a controller of all things, all things are in your hands. So it's this kind of pivoting really of the self towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, rather than saying, well, this is what it is, because what it is actually, it should increase our yaqeen in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes. And also that you're moving, remember, the individual is moving from an abstract stage of understanding. There was no context. So they may know all the names and attributes. When you were saying recently, you were teaching your children the names and attributes of Allah and everything, and they are not at a stage, and some of us are not at a stage to understand that it's just a name, and it's a nice name, and it belongs to Allah in its absolute sense and everything. But when life experience moves you and you're moving towards that adult stage, knowledge that you are gaining, you are actually using, you are actually implementing. Before then, you were only gathering information, and information is not knowledge. Information is not knowledge. Knowledge is that which is comprehended and acted upon. And through enaction, further comprehension develops. and context becomes a lot more apparent.
Yeah, subhanallah. And this is leading to and coming into the last 10 days, Dr. Abdul-Haqq, is this is around understanding really the principles of dua, isn't it, as well? Because there's we can stay up all night praying and reading Quran, but if we don't know how to make those heartfelt and heart-driven du'as, then we're kind of still not connecting those two things together. Then we're kind of missing a really great opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And if there's one takeaway from this session, is that stop looking at routine and how many du'as we've made and how many rotas we have completed. What we need to do, yes, these are important if we are adhering to the sunnah, but we need to really sit and engage with what we're saying to Allah. We need to really let the Quran and the beauty of the Quran and the du'as really consume us. These 10 nights is what's got to happen. Not, okay, I've done my units of prayer, I've done my units of dua, I've done my units of such and such. Don't even think about those units. They should be automatic by now because of the regularity in which we've been doing them. What needs to happen is to ponder over the verses. Like my sons, I said to them, don't just be reading the Quran to get through. It's the second time you finish, the third time you finish. Look at some of those words. Look at what is being said by Allah to you, to me, the servant. Ponder over them and you'll understand. And I hope the viewers and listeners will understand. When they hear imams crying in salah, listen to some of the verses that they're crying at and over. And you'll see that they're crying at how Allah says, and they attribute a son to me. Subhanak, I'm above having a son. They're crying at verses of Tawheed. They're crying at verses. How can someone commit shirk with Allah when He's given us everything that He's given us? That He is Al-Khaliq. As we said, He is Al-Malik. You see them crying at that. You see them crying at the descriptions of Jannah, of paradise, because that's where we want to be, with our parents, with our loved ones, that no eye has seen and no ear has heard. And then you hear, like, for example, when those of us who we've listening or in Surah Araf, who of us wants to be on Araf? We know they are entering Jannah, but there's an element of trepidation. They're seeing the people in the fire and they're seeing the people in paradise and they're speaking to either side of them. And you hear the imams crying and getting emotional at these particular points. Why? Why? How come that doesn't move us when we hear these verses? And for those of us like me who don't understand full Arabic and everything, I always advise, then listen to the verses of Jannah. Listen to the verses being recited of Jahannam, Jahim, and Nar, Al-Hutama. Listen to the stories of Musa and picture Musa going to the biggest tyrant on earth at that time and saying to Allah, I'm afraid. Musa was one of those Ulul Azm, one of the strong prophets and messages, but he was afraid. He lived in the house of Pharaoh, but he knew the might and destructive nature of Pharaoh. And Allah said, I am with you. Go, I am with you. Take your brother Harun. Let's ponder those. Let's ponder those and put ourselves in that position. There are people we are scared of in this life. There are people we have trepidation. I hope I never see these individuals. I hope I never have to be confronted by the police. We need to put a context and imagine this and these verses and say, subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah has given us this opportunity to really ponder. So this is where we transfer from an abstract of dua to an actualization upon ourselves, inshallah.
Inshallah. Okay, inshallah. Brother Abdul-Haqq, I can't believe it, but it's coming on to the last 10 minutes. There's one little point I want to just unravel with you a little bit, and then you can summarize as well, inshallah. But you've just mentioned about Musa alayhi salam going back to the Pharaoh and knowing, because he was brought up in that household, he knows the power, the anger, the very sort of authoritative dictatorship that's going to hit him, that's coming at him. But irrespective of that, he follows what Allah has asked of him. Yeah. And alongside that, he is behaving in a way which is aligned with, being a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like you said, one of the great prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so all of that, his behavior, and just going back to kind of what we're talking about, his core values, his belief system is informing him of everything, yet he knows what he's heading towards. He knows that difficulty he's about to face, yet all of that, what is inside him, is what is giving him courage. It's what giving him yaqeen, and it's giving him the strength to go, not just to do it, but to have the awareness, rather than just totally just be locked up by fear. It's awareness and just knowing that this is going to happen. SubhanAllah. And I think, like you said, if we parallel that to our lives, like you said, whether it's financial issues, whether it's family issues, or accumulation of many facets of things, what do we do then to build up that same courage, confidence, and that continuous self-awareness in those scenarios as they unfold to us, that we remain true to our belief system, inshallah?
I think that's a very important question. And I would say that what we need to do, every one of us, is to have a periods of where we shut ourselves away from everyone else and everything else, and we reflect on ourselves and who we are and what our beliefs are. When we do that reflection, we can become more comfortable with who we are, our deficiencies, and our strengths. And there's an important thing that we need to do daily. We don't do it daily, which is to take account of ourselves before we are taken to account. And in line with that example of Musa, alayhi salam, we also need to look at others now. We've seen multitudes of Syrians and refugees risking their lives because their once secure lifestyle in Syria has been turned upside down. And we see them traipsing in droves through Europe, being rejected from one country to the other. You'll see the women still wearing hijab. You'll see the men still looking and practicing as much as they're able to. And they've got children there, cold, freezing, still smiling. No electricity, no hot water and everything. Think about it. For them to still be holding on to their religion in all of this, what does that say about their core values? We need to look at that and say, if they can hold on to their core values in spite of what they're going through, and we're in lockdown, in our home, safe, why can we not look and review our core values? Then we go back to Musa and what was happening to Bani Israel. And Allah says, you had a tremendous trial. He placed a tremendous trial where they were killing your boys and keeping and maintaining the life of your girls. Their core values didn't make them give up and succumb and say, forget the religion of Musa and who our Lord is. We will do whatever Pharaoh says just so we can survive this. Their core values became stronger, as we see with our Syrian brothers, sisters, and children, as we see with the Rohingya now, 2-3 Ramadans living in squalor. But you still see the women wearing hijab. You still see the people talking about Allah. We can go to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We can go and look at decades, generations of occupied Palestine. And we see Muslims there. Their core values are ingrained into them in spite of what they're facing. So we must say to them, why not us as well? Especially in these 10 days.
Yeah, subhanAllah. Jazakallah khair, barakallahu feek, bruv. Yeah, we've got a few minutes actually, so we're still good for time, alhamdulillah. We've got a few minutes, inshallah. Yeah. And I think it's, I think there's a lot of, so this kind of self-awareness and self-reflection, is there like a more cognitive process that can be used to do this? Is there a way that it can be done in where it's not necessarily methodical, but there's a way of kind of measuring it. Like you said, we can look at ourselves pre-Ramadan and sort of say, okay, you know what, during Ramadan, I prayed more sunnahs, like we were discussing in the first sort of session, and especially in lockdown, we're doing more of this and that. After Ramadan, okay, actually, we're still doing this, we're still doing that. What kind of, because the more you kind of are aware of what you're changing, the easier it is to adapt to it. It's like respectfully, you go to the gym, you see people working out in the gym month in, month out, they're doing the same stuff. But then, someone like myself will be sitting there and I'll be like, yep, I added 1.5 kilograms today to that one and to this one and to this one. And I can see, that increase millimeter by millimeter. But by the end of 6 months, you know what, I'm doing okay. And that process of just, that awareness of self-change and say, is there like a way that you do these things that, in the sense of spirituality, that's one thing, having a calendar and all the rest of it, but from a deen perspective?
That's a good question. And I think that we know that Iman goes up and down, faith goes up and down. What we need to do, I believe, is reflect on what is the fruits, or what are the fruits that we are getting and feeling when we are worshipping. How, for example, do we enjoy the spirituality of the prayer, or is it a routine that we need to get out of the way in each and every day? The sunnah prayers, if we're going to miss a sunnah, like now many of us have been doing all of the sunnahs, and to miss one, it's like, oh my gosh, you feel that something has gone from you. So let's put the gym analogy, like, okay, if it's one that you're losing weight and I didn't lose those 2 kilos today, and that affects your psyche, but I'm not going to eat this, I'm staying away from that, I'm going to do extra exercise tonight just to try and get the kilos down. When you achieve that, you're like, yes, I'm there. Okay. What about with your worship? What about with that feeling of tranquility, and also that eagerness? That we can't have the eagerness that Musa had, alayhi salam, when he was racing up to Mount Sinai and Allah asked him, why are you racing? He said, I want to. We will never achieve that. But where is the enthusiasm picking up and read, even if it's a page or half a page? Where is the enthusiasm for aspects of worship? If that enthusiasm's there and there's fear to those elements there, then we know that we've progressed to a particular stage. If there's an element of humility in how we speak, being conscious of what we are saying, the harm that we may be causing, the charity we may be given to others, a smile is a sadaqah, our neighbors. If we see that this has made us an all-round, more conscious person, conscientiousness is a key to show that we have progressed. If we are seeing that, then we turn back to Allah and thank Him and ask Him to continue enlightening us and moving in that way with regards to our ibadah, our worship, inshallah.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Because I think you're right in the sense of it's taking the information I have about my deen and its knowledge in the sense that it moves into something that is practical and applicable. We've discussed around, being grateful and having those regular actions in place, but then really understanding the purpose of those actions and having knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His name and His attributes, His infinite mercy, and His way that He asks, what He asks of us, that if He asks that of us and we are obedient in that way, then returning to Him is very easy. And even when we aren't behaving in the correct way, Allah is never pushing us away. Allah says, come to me, walk to me, and I will run to you. So alhamdulillah, there are so many blessings and so many gateways that are open to us, so many routes and pathways that we can gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Absolutely. And remember this, the last thing I would add is, we know, and Allah tells us this, if we have done a wrong, follow it up with a good deed. And as the Prophet ﷺ said to Mu'adh, it will wipe it out. It will wipe it out. So do not despair of the mercy of Allah and where we may be.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair. I think that's a beautiful spot to finish on. We've just hit 6 o'clock, Dr. Abdul-Haqq. Inshallah, we look forward to catching up with you for our final session, inshallah, next Tuesday, inshallah, heading deep into the last 10 days. Jazakumullah khair for your time this evening, and thank you for joining us soon after your iftar. And may Allah bless you, may Allah bless your family, may Allah bless all of our viewers, and may Allah bless you all for continuing to support us here at IDC, and do continue to do so, inshallah. I look forward to catching up with you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.